Hello, everyone, and welcome to this People and Culture DINCast. And today's topic is something a little bit different. We're going to be looking at restorative practice in the workplace. Now, restorative practice is a bit of a tongue twister for me, so I'm going to go with RP moving forward. And that's probably a good point to welcome our guest, Lyndsay Nickerson, who is Group People and Culture Director at Aster. So welcome, Lyndsay.
Hello, nice to join you.
Oh, great to have you here. Thanks for agreeing to chat to us. So I've only ever associated RP with the criminal justice system. And it was in a conversation with you, Lyndsay, when you mentioned it, that I became a lot more curious about RP in the workplace. And I wanted to find out more. And then I thought, you know what, I suspect some of our members will want to find out more too. So hence asking you to do the DINcast, which I'm really grateful for. So yeah, let's kick off by asking you for our listeners that are unfamiliar with RP, how would you describe it in a nutshell?
Okay, well, I was a bit like you. I'd only ever heard of it in a kind of criminal justice
Hmm.
setting as well. So it feels a bit, um, a bit kind of abstract to be thinking about how you apply that in terms of a people function and how you kind of roll that out across employees. But really, I guess in a nutshell, it's just a way of communicating. It's a way of engaging with people that, builds trust, accountability, collaboration. And I think, at the heart of restorative, whether that's in the way that we've applied it in our business and others have started to do, or whether that's in a, criminal setting, really, RP, it's just about focusing on relationships. It's about, not looking at shaming and blaming people, not looking at punishments. Instead, it's about, how do you encourage that open dialogue to resolve conflict? How do you help people from all different perspectives see different points of view? How do you strengthen workplace culture? So I'm not sure I said in a nutshell. I'm not sure that is in a nutshell, but really, it's about how we communicate and interact with each other.
That is in a nutshell, because and I think what you've really clarified is that is really transferable. So the
Yeah.
things that I sort of thought I knew about it, what you've done there is very helpfully kind of explain that can really translate across into a business setting.
Yeah, yeah.
So what inspired you and Aster to explore RP practices in the first place? What was the trigger?
I'm not sure there was one trigger. I mean, I think at our start, I think we're really lucky. We've got quite a progressive board, quite a progressive CEO, and by that very nature, we like to try new things, and some things work, some things don't, and if they don't work, we kind of put that down and we move on to the next thing. But I guess around culture and our people experience, our goal is really to foster a culture, I guess, where our people feel heard, where they're respected, and really where they're empowered to take accountability. And
Mm.
so, we were talking a lot about that within our team. And initially, we were starting to look at our HR policies and processes and thinking, okay, well, could we do that in a kind of slightly different way? How could we push more kind of accountability down into kind of to the line leaders, into colleagues kind of in their day to day, rather than that all kind of coming centrally. And then we kind of really stumbled across that idea of, actually, as you say, you can transfer those principles of restorative practice into a work setting. And for us, that was kind of a light bulb moment, in that we kind of realized that if we applied those principles in our day to day, and we have something at Aster called the Aster Way, and that kind of sets out our cultural expectations, really, our ambitions, the behaviours that we expect. But we thought, if we try to adopt those principles of RP within that Aster Way, we were pretty confident that that would lead us to, starting to develop a stronger, healthier workplace culture, stronger, healthier workplace relationships. So there wasn't one trigger. I think a culmination of different things, thoughts, activities kind of led us to restorative, and just exploring, experimenting, and just trying and just seeing if actually would this work for us.
I love that, Lyndsay, that you were prepared to give it a go, and that
Yeah,
this
yeah.
isn't common practice. So there's not. I don't suppose there's lots of organisations using it. But I love the fact that you said, you know what, let's give it a go. It feels like a fit with our, you know, with the Aster way. So
Yeah, yeah,
let's give it a go. And if it doesn't work, well, hey, we'll move on to something else. But
yeah.
I love the fact that you're up for exploring, trying, and experimenting.
Always up for an experiment, an experiment, always.
Yeah.
And you know, it's stuff, you might try 10 different things, might you? But actually, one might stick and might work and have real impact. And for
Yeah.
us, this is, one of those.
Yeah. And were there any challenges to getting people on board with this idea? Because probably like you and I, most people associate it with the criminal justice system. So was there any challenges to kind of getting it in, through as an idea to get cracking?
Yeah, absolutely. And, colleagues listening to this, you'll know that, change isn't easy. Shifting mindsets isn't easy. And I think, we had worked at Aster for a long time with pretty traditional HR kind of policies, processes, ways of working, ways of communicating. And I think that had become the norm, as it does in lots of organizations. And I think, you know, an experiment like this and starting to roll this out as a way of, what we do around here, that kind of approach does take effort. So yeah, there were absolutely challenges. There were absolutely some colleagues who fully embraced the concept right from the get-go, who literally wrap their arms around that idea of, right, we can do this in a different way, and just ran with it. But, as always, there are others who are more skeptical for all different reasons. But over time, I think what we found is that as colleagues started to experience the benefits, and as they started to hear those stories, and with anything like this,
Mm,
for me, it's always about that storytelling that sits beyond and beneath a new approach. So as those real colourful stories started to emerge across the business about, have you heard, or, did you know, that kind of stuff, all that good stuff, it just helped with the buy-in. And we just saw over time buy-in, particularly from those more, I guess, harder to reach groups of colleagues, it definitely increased.
brilliant. And so how did you go about training leaders and colleagues in the practice?
Yeah, so again, and that's a challenge. We're quite a big organisation now, spread
Yeah.
over a large geography. And when we started looking at restorative, that was kind of pre-COVID. So it was more, Aster, now we're more or less a virtual, we work in communities, but for our desk-based colleagues, we work virtually. So at that time, we were in offices and covering a large geography. So we had to factor all of that in at the time. But I guess we started off thinking about kind of my area, the people team, and thinking about, could we really immerse ourselves in the concept? And once we kind of understood A, the principles of RP, and then B, how we thought it could apply across the organisation, we developed a 3-day workshop that was going to be aimed at all leaders. And we worked with a really well-respected expert in this field, and she really helped us develop that training and make it really real. And I think that's important. Often, again, these kind of concepts, these new approaches, they can kind of feel quite abstract to leaders on the ground who are, bogged down with the day-to-day reality of the service that they're delivering. So I think working with somebody who had been there and done it before, not in organisations actually, but again in the criminal justice sector, I think that really helped us think about how could we land some training that was really real for our leaders. So we did that. So we took all leaders through a 3-day really interactive, immersive workshop. And then we rolled out a 1-day learning session for all colleagues. And then that became, once we'd kind of gone through everybody who was employed, and we literally did do that. So everybody went through either a 3-day or a 1-day workshop. We've rolled that same training out across through our colleague and leadership development work. So now everybody that joins Aster, again, that's part of your kind of mandatory, what we would expect people to do as they're starting to onboard with us.
Brilliant. I love I love the investment in it. You took this on and really invested in it. But also that knowledge transfer approach where you weren't going to bring in an expert necessarily every time you had a situation to use it. It was about culturally moving the organization and that knowledge transfer so you got the skills and developing new skills in the business at the same time. So
yeah, and that knowledge transfer is really important, because so as well as kind of going through that kind of basic 3-day or 1-day session, we identified some leaders who just had a natural flair, who were
okay,
naturally aligned to that, and then we put them through kind of additional training, so they became level 2 practitioners, and they became almost that kind of super group within the organization, again to work with an accredited expert, but that group of colleagues, again, as you say, they can kind of pass on that knowledge to a greater scale through the organization.
yeah, brilliant, because it's sort of almost infiltrated every part of the
Yeah,
organization,
yeah,
done it
yeah.
rather than it sit as something in HR. That's fantastic. And how do you think the adoption has impacted the culture at Aster?
In lots of ways and to varying degrees, I think. We've definitely seen an improvement in communication. Definitely have
Mhm.
seen stronger teamwork in places. We've seen more people stepping forward, taking accountability for how they react to situations.
Yeah,
Um, I think generally for people in our business who use restorative techniques and principles in their day to day, I think they would say that they, absolutely feel comfortable addressing conflict directly. And that's definitely had a reduction in terms of tension and those misunderstandings that can then often lead to quite formal processes. We saw in the first year after we adopted this as a way of working, we saw a huge decline, for example, in the number of grievances that were being filed across the
wow.
business. So, some real tangible impacts. But I think, that's the kind of big stuff. I think the day to day, though, it just feels the language of restorative and those principles that exist, that has become part of our DNA. And it's
Brilliant.
not perfect, and there's still work to do, and it's not fully embedded everywhere, but we are on a journey with it, and absolutely, I would say 100% it's impacted our culture positively.
That's great to hear, and some real tangible indicators that get to go with
Yeah.
it than just a feeling. So, and is there you talked about stories in one of your answers there, Lyndsay, and about how those stories are really impactful and help to kind of spread the message, but also grow the appetite for it. Is there a story? I appreciate there's confidentiality issues here, and wouldn't want to go close to those. But is there a story about RP that you could share that's made a tangible difference? Perhaps that's might have had a different outcome if you'd had to use traditional HR practice.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots. I mean, one that really sticks in my mind was from the early days, actually, and it was two leaders who, for lots of different reasons, and they were from two different parts of the business, but needed to work very closely together to deliver a customer service that was good. And those two leaders, there was a misunderstanding, almost a breakdown in communication between them, and we were heading to formal HR intervention in that traditional sense. But being able to use the restorative principles, and to be fair to them both, they were open to a different approach. So we chatted to them about, before we go down this more formal route to try and resolve this conflict, let us see if we can do something more informally. So we paired them with again, one of the colleagues that was trained to a higher level, and
Yeah.
they engaged in an open dialogue, and with the support from that colleague who was trained, who could facilitate, and they're called talking circles, who could facilitate I guess just a really open, honest adult conversation between the two of them, where they both would feel that they had space to share their truth and share their perception and their view on the situation. Actually, we found that they were able to work through the issues that had probably been building up for a long time. They worked through those issues, and actually there was no formal HR intervention needed. And that was such a win for us in those early days, because it was a real demonstration of, you don't need to jump to that kind of nuclear option.
Mm.
There are other ways. You can take accountability for the situation yourself with some help, but you absolutely are empowered to to resolve some of this, yourself. And I think if you compare that and what happened to that traditional HR approach, there would have been a formal grievance that would have been investigated, that would have all been escalated. No one ever comes away from those things feeling positive. There's never any winners in those situations. Whereas in that situation, actually, those two leaders walked away and they felt heard, they felt seen, they felt respected. They were never going to be best friends, and that's fine, but they were able to find a way of working together for the good of their teams. That's got to be a win.
Definitely. And great that you've got then some more advocates for the approach. Yeah, fabulous. And what advice would you give maybe any of our members that have heard this and thought, you know what, wouldn't mind looking at using a similar approach? Is there anything early advice you would be able to offer?
Yeah, I guess I think it's, start with your leaders. And I think starting with your leaders, we all know that if leaders role model a certain behavior, team members will tend to follow, and you'll tend to get that new way of working embedded more successfully. So I guess my overriding advice would be start with your leadership. I think training is key, patience is essential. Change takes time, but the long-term benefits are absolutely worth it, and put that investment in. But it will be an investment of time and everything.
Yeah, thank you. And we always love to learn from people that have done something before us. And so is there anything you might have done differently if you were starting the RP journey again?
Yeah, definitely. And actually, this is a kind of ongoing topic of conversation that I'm having with my team at the moment. And I think for us, our biggest lesson has been not to give this way of communicating a label. So, when we first started rolling out the approach, restorative practice, it was everywhere. We were using that, restorative badge everywhere. And I think for those who are less curious about a new way of working, it's often better not to label it or almost brand that approach. I think for us, we found some colleagues perceived that, to be restorative, well, the people team would come along and do something to you. And that completely goes against the grain of actually what restorative is all about. The fundamental principles of restorative are around, working with and taking accountability. And I think more recently for us, we've begun dropping the term restorative completely in our language. And instead, we're just focusing on those principles. So fair process, having voice, taking accountability, transparency, and then just using the core kind of questions that, that kind of make up that approach. So what happened? What was the impact? What needs to happen next? And I think by dropping the label, for us already, we're starting to embed this way of working more deeply across the business. And I think for us, as I say, we've still got work to do. This is not wholly embedded across all parts of the business and in terms of a day-to-day in how we work. So I think for us, dropping that label, it's just allowing us to go one step further.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You're so right about labels. They can be a positive or negative flag for people. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Really appreciate it. And how do you see this evolving then? What are the next steps for? I mean, you've talked about kind of it being more of just some areas of the business, etc. How do you see it evolving for you?
I just think it's that. I think, we don't just use it internally for colleagues. Our customer facing teams also use the principles as well when dealing with customers. So that's great. And I think just across the board, I think it's about how do we now really embed it further. I think, we're probably 5 years down the journey, nearly 6 years down the journey. And I think you have different points when you're rolling out a new approach, don't you? And I think for us now, it's about how do we truly make this just at the heart of how we interact with each other. I think for us, it's just working through how do we really truly embed that right across that employee life cycle. So from how we onboard our people right through to how we offboard somebody. So how do those principles apply throughout that entire life cycle? And I think that's what we're looking at the moment.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's really helpful. And just one last point before I let you go, if that's okay. If you could perhaps point to one thing you'd like listeners to take away from our discussion today, what would that be?
I would say, and I've already talked about being curious. I think just be curious about a different way. We didn't know when we started out on that journey, how it would end, or if it would even have any impact, good or bad, actually. But I think, it's just about being curious about, just because you've done something in a certain way for so long, well, there's always a different way. So I think just particularly for people teams and for people that are kind of looking at organizational culture, that, just be curious about, actually, could you do this in a different way? And for us, what started off thinking about could we kind of relook at our HR policies has ended up being a whole new way of communicating. So just be curious and just try stuff, just experiment. And if it doesn't work, well, that's okay. Nothing lost. Just move on to the next thing.
Brilliant advice. Thank you. Thanks so much, Lyndsay, for joining us
Please.
today. I'm sure we'll come back to you at some point to see where it's going for
Yeah,
you
do.
and
Yeah.
Aster, but really appreciate it. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.